Tell me, do you bleed? Oh, sorry, did you wanna... Oh, no, after you. No, it's fine, I insist. You wanna just go get some Dunkin' Donuts? I thought you'd never ask.
In this corner, the DC Comics Multiverse BATFLECK by Mattel, and in this corner, the DC Multiverse BATFLECK by McFarlane Toys. It's a battle of old versus new, and if there's even a 1% chance that Mattel is better, we have to take it as an absolute certainty. Starting with the packaging, and both figures come in window boxes, McFarlane has a simply stated name and logo, making the figure really stand out. Mattel, while more colorful and creative, is very, very busy. I do like that glimpse of the character, and how that glimpse has that peekaboo page curl just like the DC logo did at the time. What I don't like is this wall of warning text right by his head. Having to include all those different languages really doesn't do anything to help that cluttering issue, and the funny thing is you have to tilt the box towards you just to read the name of the line. In that regard, it's kind of like Mattel's Masterverse series. One thing I do like is the graphic of Batman on the side. For those who want to line up their figures on a shelf, it's definitely more visually interesting. Also, for those hunting him, here's the barcode. And then on the back we get the Batman v Superman movie poster. Given that the movie figures usually just have artwork, that's pretty refreshing. Similar to the front and the back of Mattel is also pretty busy. Understandably, you get a picture of the Build-A-Figure. Sorry, I mean the Collect and Connect trademark figure, as well as all the figures in the wave. Honestly, I don't mind that, and I think it's very helpful. And while there are things about this box I do like, it's just too busy and too cluttered. For packaging, this round goes to McFarlane. Moving on to presentation, and Mattel stands at 6 1/4 inches, and at the tips of his ears, McFarlane stands at 7 1/4. First things first, let's look at the sculpt. While Mattel wasn't exactly known for their high level of detail, there's a surprising amount of it in this figure. Although there isn't really much in the way of texture in the bodysuit, there is some. Most importantly, you can appreciate all the different seam lines and fabric pulls. That said, there is texture where they need it in places such as the logo, as well as that leathery look for the gloves, and also the boots. Definitely a missed opportunity for some texture in the cape, but to Mattel's credit, they did accurately capture what the bottom of the cape looked like. Instead of the traditional scallops, his was more just kinda tattered across. I also really like the bulk of this figure. Affleck's Batman was very broad, and this totally captures that. Where the figure is let down is by how obvious the joints are. Most especially the legs, but we'll talk about them in the next category, and it's a shame that they did have to break up this glove. Obviously, when you pose them though, you don't notice it. By contrast, McFarlane has done a fantastic job of integrating all those articulation points. In a case like this, the diaper system does a great job of making the hips look natural, and while it's often a distraction, the diaphragm joint does a pretty good job of working here. One thing that I'm very fascinated by is that they're kind of an inverse of each other in terms of texture. Like I said, the bodysuit on Mattel doesn't get a lot, but that does allow you to see all the fabric tugs. McFarlane, on the other hand, went real crazy with the texture on the bodysuit. As such, a lot of details like the fabric pulls and seam lines kind of get lost in the shuffle. Again, Mattel went out of their way to texture the boots and the gloves, whereas McFarlane's are smooth. But like the Mattel bodysuit, that does allow you to appreciate the other details. Fortunately, the symbol is properly textured and also scraped up. I'm also fascinated by the different approaches to the proportions. Affleck's costume was really big and bulky and almost felt like it was swallowing him. This was intended to evoke the Dark Knight Returns comic. By contrast, McFarlane's is fairly slender. As a general Batman figure, I like that, but I do feel like this could be bulkier. One of the biggest differences is that McFarlane has a cloth goods cape. Presumably, that'll let him sit down in the Batmobile if McFarlane ever makes one, or you get that oversized Justice League Mattel one. But just like all the Batmans in the six-pack, he has those big giant scallops, which again look great for Batman, but are not accurate to Affleck's version. The next part of presentation we need to talk about is paint. Mattel correctly made the base of Batman's utility belt black with some gold accents. They also correctly added gold to the knuckles, and also the toes of the boots. McFarlane did none of that. Instead, they made the entire belt one solid gold piece, and didn't add any other detail anywhere. Those tiny details wouldn't be hard to paint in, and I honestly might do it myself, but it's still worth noting the difference. Also in McFarlane's defense, they added a wonderful dark wash that really brings out all that texture. That's the kind of thing I've been hoping for a long time. Lastly, it comes down to likeness. Again, Affleck's Batman was stocky and broad with a short neck and a very wide mask, and this absolutely nails it. As a general Batman head, the McFarlane one is good, but I don't really see Affleck. Granted, it's not as bad as this, but it's also not as good as this. If you swap the peg out with a shorter one, it's a lot better, and I have seen where people have added a 5 o'clock shadow and it really does bring out the sculpt. And while I'll admit that McFarlane is objectively better engineered and better made, factory fresh and with no modifications, Mattel has the better likeness, the better paint job, and the better proportions. For presentation, this round goes to Mattel. Sad fleck. Moving on to posability, and while I think we all know where this is gonna go, it's still a conversation worth having. Top down and both heads are on dumbbell joints. Affleck famously had more range than other Batman actors, but unfortunately the Mattel one can't look up at all, nor can he really look down. He can't really tilt, but hey, at least he does get all the way around. Moving down, and both figures can raise their arms about 90 degrees, with Mattel being slightly higher. McFarlane, however, has that fabulously functional rotator cuff. Both have bicep swivel, but whereas McFarlane has a double jointed elbow with a perfect bend, Mattel has a single jointed hinge that only gets 90 degrees. He also only has a wrist swivel, whereas McFarlane has wrist balls that can swivel and hinge in any direction. Moving to the middle, and Mattel has an ab crunch and a waist swivel, whereas McFarlane has a diaphragm joint and a dumbbell waist. They can arch back this far with McFarlane having the edge, but as we all know, the ab crunch is far better for the hunching forward. Usually. Not gonna lie, for a DC Multiverse, this hunch forward is great. That diaphragm also allows him to tilt, whereas Mattel can only twist. Below the objectively better painted utility belt, Mattel has these swivel hinge hips. They're functional, but absolutely hideous. Not only that, he can only kick this high. McFarlane has a ratcheted detent system with these diapers that make a much more natural look. This one can kick this high and do a perfect split. Of course, Mattel has thigh cut, which automatically makes it better. Though I gotta admit, the twist on this one's pretty good. Moving down the leg, Mattel has a single jointed knee, whereas McFarlane's is double jointed and completely flush with his back. And while Mattel has ankles that can hinge, McFarlane has toe articulation and ankles that can swivel, hinge, and pivot. Coming as a surprise to absolutely no one, and for posability, this round goes to McFarlane. Moving on to playability, and I need to remind you that the Mattel figure is technically from Suicide Squad and not Dawn of Justice. That's going to be important to this category and also to the next one. As for accessories though, and starting with McFarlane, and he comes with a trading card and a figure stand. If you want to read it, it's a pretty generic synopsis of Batman v Superman, similar to how all the Batman-Robin trading cards were the same. Keep that in mind because that's going to come up in the next category also. McFarlane comes pre-loaded with these trigger hands. I'd make a joke about Batman not using guns, but this is Ben Affleck, so he's probably killed about 17 people during this review alone. He's got his grapnel gun. As you can see, it's quite large, and a solid black without any paint to detail. He's also got not one, but two oversized batarangs, and an alternate pair of fists. No alternate hands on Mattel. Instead, he has one fist and one accessory holding hand. Those accessories include a much better scale grapnel gun that's beautifully painted. Here he is holding it for a sense of contrast. Additionally, he has three batarangs, which are not only in scale, but also painted, a gas bomb, a pair of bat cuffs, and a whole alternate head with a ventilator. And if all that wasn't enough, he even comes with the torso of Killer Croc. Of course, what I really want is for one of these BATFLECK figures to come with a knife to reenact the scene where he stabs a guy like Michael Myers. You know, just like Batman would. But playability is more than just oversized accessories or making fun of what's objectively the single greatest fight scene in any Batman movie ever. It's also about how well your figure plays with others. Starting literally with the Man of Steel, and here we have the Mattel 6-inch Cavill, and the McFarlane, which as you can see towers over Affleck. That said, for those curious about some comic options, and here we have Action Comics 1000, here we have Hush. Next up, and for the customizers, here's Page Punchers, and the Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I looked at in my last video. Rounding out the Trinity, and here we have Mattel's version of Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, as well as the McFarlane one from Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Much like Superman, she is quite a bit taller than Batman. For a couple of comic options though, and here's DC Rebirth by Mattel, and the McFarlane Collector Edition. I don't have a Mattel Momoa, but I do have this classic comic version of Aquaman. I also have this 90s style hook hand version. That said, I do have the movie version by McFarlane, as well as the Endless Winter one sporting an alternate Barry Allen head. Speaking of Barry, I also don't have a Mattel movie version of Flash, but I do have DC Universe Classics. I also have Flashpoint by McFarlane, and the Snyder Cut, who's also taller than Batman. For a couple of lanterns of the green variety, and here's a Mattel John Stewart, and also a McFarlane. But moving on to some Batman villains, and here we have the DC Universe Classics Joker. And then for McFarlane, and here we have the Clown Joker. And since poor Ben never got a Joker of his own, here we have Mortal Kombat 11. Why, if Ben Affleck did have a Joker, which I cannot stress enough he did not, I can't even imagine what that would have been like. All joking aside, for 6-inch Catwoman, and here we have DC Superheroes by Mattel. I imagine the Mattel Arkham City would be a pretty good match too. I say that based on how good these two McFarlanes look together. Since Ben really did never get a Catwoman, this works great for me. And never having gotten a Penguin, here we have Arkham City. You know, this doesn't look half bad with both of them. And then here we have Arkham City Riddler, Aaron Eckhart Two-Face from The Dark Knight, video game Scarecrow from Arkham Knight, and for those dreaming of what that standalone Ben Affleck movie with Joe Manganiello as Deathstroke could have been, here we have the one from Arkham Origins. For some other members of the Bat family, and here we have the Better Than Batman version of Nightwing, and also the Gotham Knights version. Next up is the Three Jokers version of the Red Hood, and again the Gotham Knights version. And then for one that I think looks great with the 6-inch Batman, and here we have Tim Drake. As for McFarlane, and here's the Gotham Knights version, which actually looks pretty good because of all the texture. And finally, the comic-style Nightfall version. For a relative scale comparison, here are our Batflecks with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. And as always, here they are with Stealth Iron Man.
So, hey Batman, does it feel weird to be replaced by so many different actors? I personally wouldn't know.
Seeing just how small the McFarlane one is next to the rest of the Justice League is really disappointing. And then if you do the neck modification to make him more accurate, he's even smaller. Obviously, you can use things like perspective to make it work, and while they are a bit big and could use some paint, the accessories are fine. But between the better scaling, as well as the better variety, quantity, and quality of accessories, for playability, this round goes to Mattel. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. Because the Suicide Squad figure was a reuse of the BVS Batman, Mattel didn't have to spend any new money on tooling. That's why they were able to include so many great accessories. McFarlane, however, is all new, and I suspect that this single carded release isn't how we were supposed to get him. The only time I have ever seen a McFarlane Batman with this good of a hunch forward was the Ultimate Movies 6-pack. Those figures, incidentally, had the same peg hole in the back to accommodate a plastic cape. I suspect that this was intended for the 6-pack, but then subbed out for Justice League because of the cost, and that we will absolutely see this figure again, but with a plastic cape. And with no DC movies coming out in 2024, what better way than with a Build-A-Wave? If my predictions are right, you heard it here first. The crazy thing is that this 2016 Mattel figure is still readily available on the aftermarket for about $20. Same thing as the retail price for McFarlane. For price, this round is a draw, making this battle a tie. Each one has its strengths and weaknesses, but either one would be a great addition to your display. Now I know what you're thinking, Jason, what about all the head swaps? The thing is, there are so many swaps I want to do that it's going to take a video of its very own. Stay tuned for that, and if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.